Thank you. Please have your seat as we view our safety briefing.
Graduate School. Please pay attention to the following safety procedures and house rules. Reverse parking is mandatory. Parking and waiting in front of the main entrance of the building is prohibited. You must pay special attention to the locations of the zebra crossings in the park. If you are unsure about parking restrictions, our courteous security officers will be happy to assist you with your queries. Upon entering and exiting the building, all visitors are required to sign the logbook, which is located at the reception booth. Washrooms are located on the ground floor opposite the restaurant and on the first floor at the northern end of the building. Smoking is permitted in designated smoking areas only, and with the exception of bottled water, wooden drinks are not allowed in parked areas. There are emergency doors throughout the building that are clearly labeled. Please do not lean on these doors as the alarm will be activated and evacuation of the building will be mandatory. There are two muster points on the campus. Muster point 1 is located to the right of the security booth, and muster point 2 is located left of the security booth. In the event of an emergency, you will be directed to an appropriate muster point by safety orders who are easily identified by their green reflective vests. These orders will train in CPR and basic first aid and will be able to administer assistance if necessary. Fire exits are clearly labeled and located to the east, west, north, and south of the building. The logbook will be used to account for all visitors on campus. Re-entry is allowed by facilities personnel after a thorough inspection is conducted and the building is declared safe. Our health and safety room is located on the first floor to the north end of the building, and access is controlled by the designated safety wardens. Thank you for adhering to our policies, and to enjoy your stay at our long-term graduate school of business.
The Honourable Camille Robinson Regis, Minister of Planning and Development, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Elaine Ovid, Ministry of Planning and Development, our sponsors, iGov-TT and PowerGen and their management team, senior ministry directors, advisors and officials, representatives of the various chambers and associations including TTMA, Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce, the Energy Chamber, the British Chamber, TTCSI, members of our panel, specially invited guests, faculty, staff, students, alumni, viewers from Suriname, Guyana, Guatemala, and Ghana, online through live stream, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Viola Nicholas, and I am your MC for our event here this morning. Today, the World Economic Forum with the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business is pleased to share with you the results of its 2015-2016 Global Competitiveness Report. This year's report provides an overview of the competitiveness performance of 144 economies, and thus it continues to be the most comprehensive assessment of its kind globally. It contains a detailed profile for each of the economies included in the study, as well as an extensive selection of data tables with global rankings covering over 100 indicators. This report is one of the flagship publications within the Forum's Global Competitiveness and Benchmarking Network, which produces a number of related research studies aimed at supporting countries in their transformation efforts and raising awareness about the need to adopt holistic and integrated frameworks for understanding complex phenomena such as competitiveness or global risks. It is this that sets the context for this morning's event. Before we go any further, we really must say thank you to our sponsors, iGov-TT and PowerGen. To deliver our sponsor's remarks, I invite on the stage Mr. Trevor Liebert, Chief Executive Officer of iGovTT.
Thank you, Ms. Nicholas. The Honorable Camille Robinson Regis, Minister of Planning and Development. Permanent Secretary, Ms. Joanne Diorage, Ministry of Planning and Development. Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Aileen Allen Ovid, Ministry of Planning and Development. Sponsors, iGovTT and PowerGen. iGovTT and PowerGen Management Team. Senior Ministry Directors, Advisors and Officials. Representatives of chambers and associations from the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, Trinidad and Tobago Chamber, the Energy Chamber, the British Chamber, Trinidad and Tobago Coalition of Services Industries, members of the panel, specially invited guests, faculty, staff, students, alumni, log-on viewers from Suriname, Guyana, Guatemala, and Ghana, online live stream attendees, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The National Information and Communication Technology Company Limited, also known as iGovTT, is once again pleased to be a sponsor of this year's launch of the national release of the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Report. We were also delighted to share in the April 2015 launch of the Global Information Technology Report, where we discussed how prepared our economy was to apply the benefits of ICTs to promote economic growth and development. Today marks our fourth time sponsoring this event with the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business. I should hope, therefore, that this sends a clear message that we at iGovTT support and will continue to encourage any effort aimed at discussing the very important issues of technology, competitiveness, and national development. It would be remiss of me if I did not congratulate and thank the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business and its organizers for providing the forum within which such matters can be discussed. Information technology is now a fundamental enabling infrastructure of the new competitive regime. For any developing country pursuing global competitiveness, ICT development is closely prescribed, if not at the top of the list. The ICT sector has proven to be a strong driver of GDP growth in nations across the world, from developing countries such as the Philippines and India to developed nations such as the United States of America and Ireland. The ICT sector has contributed to the success of each of these nations' economies, the advancement of its people's skills and capabilities, and positioning them among the most desirable places to do business efficiently, thereby attracting much needed international investment. Trinidad and Tobago has already established itself as an efficient business location, and key at this point is a transition to a technologically sophisticated, knowledge-based economy. With this transition, foreign investors will benefit from a more business-savvy environment, stronger local supply chain, and a systemically stronger country with a clear roadmap to global competitiveness. Given the space that iGovTT occupies and our interest predominantly lies in the state of our country's technological readiness, it is against this backdrop that we continue to forge ahead with plans for supporting government ministries and agencies in their utilization of information and communication technologies. We at iGovTT are constantly examining how best the solutions we offer can ease government's costs of doing business, raise the level of efficiency within the public sector, and increase the confidence of nationals and those interested in doing business in and with Trinidad and Tobago. We continue to demonstrate the value of a new and integrated model for the delivery of government information services to the business and civic society through the management of our TT Connect service. TT Connect comprises 5 channels for government service delivery: TT Connect Online, TT Connect Mobile, self-service kiosks, TT Connect Service Centers, and the TT Connect Express Bus, which is a mobile service center that services residents of rural communities. iGovTT is also working alongside ministries on other larger scale ICT projects, and we are currently spearheading the implementation of a next generation government-wide area communications network that will improve upon communications infrastructure currently deployed across government. This new infrastructure will also form the backbone for improved coordination and information flows across government ministries and agencies for better public service delivery. The work of the World Economic Forum is critical to the continued development of emerging economies such as ours for many reasons. However, speaking specifically on its impact on Trinidad and Tobago, and in the context of this report, the information provides our nation with a valuable scorecard on what we have done well and the areas where we need to do even better. In closing, allow me a moment to once again express our appreciation to the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business for inviting us to participate in today's launch. I can assure you that we at iGovTT will continue to support the widespread awareness of the Global Information Technology Report and the Global Competitiveness World Economic Forum reports, as well as the executive opinion surveys which feed into these reports. We understand the importance of data collection in providing a basis for calculating our performance rankings, and we will therefore do our part in encouraging other business groups to respond enthusiastically to the surveys. I eagerly anticipate the discussions to follow this morning and certainly hope that this level of dialogue does not end at this event. I thank you all for your kind attention and do look forward to an opportunity to engage you once again in the near future. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Liebert, and also for iGovTT's support over the last 4 surveys. We really appreciate your view of technology and innovation as a driver for growth, and we look forward to our continued partnership in the future. Now, this year, we have 2 presentations on the results of the WEF Global Competitiveness Report. Our first presenter, Dr. Balraj Kisto, is the Director of Master and Small and Medium Enterprise Management Program, as well as a member of faculty here at Lockjack Graduate School of Business. And he will provide the rankings of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as a review of the pillars. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Balraj Kisto to the stage.
Good morning. All protocols have been observed, so I'll get straight into the presentation. So it is my pleasure this morning to present the results of the Global Competitiveness Report 2015-2016. Before we actually get into the results, let me take a little while to explain the structure and the organization of the report. As Fayla said, this report is one of the report produced by the World Economic Forum. So we have the Information and Technology Report, we have the Gender Gap Report, we have the Risk Report. But this is their flagship report, and a lot of the information is collected here, usually will ripple through to the other reports. So it is produced by the World Economic Forum out of Lausanne in Switzerland. And the idea of the index is to capture the micro and the macroeconomic foundations of a country's economy. And you say the micro and the macro level, and when you look at the results that you have in your package, we'll explain further what that would mean. Now, the whole idea of this report is an apolitical report, and is really intended to provide some benchmark tools for discussion. So we are looking to identify some of the obstacles to competitiveness. And so this should stimulate discussions as to what we can do and how we can move together in seeking to remove these obstacles. They define competitiveness as a set of institutions, policies, and factors that determine the level of productivity of a country. And that term productivity is key to the entire process of competitiveness, because productivity is the basis upon which competitiveness rests. So when you look at the level of productivity in a country, that is what will determine the long-term growth and prosperity. In short, the more productive an economy is, the higher would be the level of income that would be generated from that economy. Now, what is the implied framework of the index? It's that firms in a country are the production units. So it is not the country in itself that is the one that is producing, but it's the unit of production in the country, which is the firms, be it privately owned or government owned. The state, through the arm of the government, is responsible for creating the enabling environment so that production can take place in a seamless manner. With that in mind, the index is arranged along 12 pillars, and you can see the 12 pillars there, and it is then subdivided into 3 sub-indices: basic requirements, efficiency enhancers, and innovation and sophistication factors. So what you see is that we are saying that, okay, there are some pillars that you need. It's basic to any economy. Then you have what is called factors that would lead to improvement in your efficiency. And high up the chain, you have the innovation and sophistication factors. Further to that, economies are not all the same. In order to take or give recognition to that, we find that the pillar are now divided, and we look at economies in 3 stages. That is to say, we have a factor-driven economies, efficiency-driven economies, and innovation-driven economies. Now, what that is saying is, doesn't mean that if you are in the innovation-driven stage, you are not responsible or you need to look at the basic requirements. But you would find that an economy that is in the factor-driven stage would need to place a little more emphasis on their basic requirements. Whereas as you move down up the chain, actually, an innovation-driven economy would need to keep an eye here and here, but they also need to keep a more watchful eye on these factors, which is innovation and sophistication. How do we determine where an economy falls? Well, it is largely determined by the per capita income of a country. Now, bear in mind, the Global Competitiveness Index is a lead indicator, not a lag indicator. What do I mean by that? A lag indicator is like your financial statement. It tells you what has happened over the last year. A lead indicator is like a cholesterol test. It tells you, based on this, what could happen in the future. So this index is a lead indicator. So if a country is classified, has a per capita income of greater than 17,000 US, that's per capita, it is saying that if you want to maintain your long-term growth and prosperity, these are the things you need to look at. So a country now would have a weighted index, and the weights now will be determined by the stage at which you are at. So a country that's in the factor-driven stage, 60% of the index would be made up of weights from the first factor, which is the factor-driven or the basic requirements. Whereas an economy that's in the innovation stage would have to pay a greater attention to their innovation and sophistication factors. So 20% would focus on the basic requirement. So it's not that you are totally ignoring that. 50% would be on your efficiency-driven factors, and 30% would be on your innovation and sophistication factors. So the index is now a weighted index. Now, where do we get the data for this? It comes from two sources, quantitative and qualitative sources. The quantitative data is taken from recognized international institutions like the World Bank, UNESCO, the IMF, and so on. Now, it is very important, therefore, as a country, our data at these institutions are fully updated, because the WEF would tell us, year after year, we cannot take the data from you directly. We need to get it from one source so that it comes from all 140 countries. This is the source that we would take that data from. Secondly, the qualitative data, we collect this data through an executive opinion survey, and I'm sure some of you would have filled out this survey. It's a pretty comprehensive survey that is administered in hard copy and online during the months of February to the end of April every year. Now, the survey itself is about 19 pages long, and it covers a wide range of subjects and areas, and it's on a Likert scale of 1 to 7. So you grade based on 1 to 7, and you'll see the importance of that 1 to 7 when we speak about the scores. Now, the results, we are looking for 3 aspects of the results. You get 3 different scores, 3 different pieces of information. So as you go along, you can follow from your package. You would have the Trinidad and Tobago and the overall ranking. So you can use that, and we'll follow along as we explain. So 1, you will get a total rank. That's your place in class. Where did I do out of 140 countries? Secondly, you are given a score, which is a weighted average score out of 1 to 7. And the score is from macro to micro. So you have an overall score for the country. Then you will have the sub-indices score. You would have pillar scores. And then at the micro level, you have dimension scores and ranking. And finally, you are given information concerning the problematic factors for doing business in a country. So let's talk about the results and the report for 2015-2016. Now, the theme of this year's report is reaching beyond the new normal. That new normal is lower economic growth, lower productivity growth, and higher employment in the recent history. What we have seen is that we have had lower growth than in previous decade. And on top of that, we have uncertainty fueled by geopolitical tension, slowdown in the emerging markets, and we now have humanitarian crisis taking place. So we are dealing with all of that. And to emphasize even more, if we look at this graph, what it is basically telling us, and you can look at Latin America here, our productivity, total factor productivity in the last decade has declined vis-a-vis the previous decade to that, which is 1995 to 2004. In short, we are getting less out of our input in the last decade as opposed to the previous decade previous to that. And Professor Carrillo will elaborate more on that in his presentation. Now, let's look at the ranking for this year and some of the highlights. So at the top of the scale, we have Switzerland, followed by Singapore and the US. And then we have the others. Now, what are some of the key things to note there? China is stable at 28. Interestingly, Chile is the highest ranked economy at 35 in the Caribbean and Latin America. Interestingly, the US is number 3. The US went down as far as number 6 in some previous years. So we see the US moving up the scale. Finland is one economy that has fallen somewhat. The last 4 years or so, Finland was number 1. They have now fallen to number 8 in the ranking. So all in all, we see there's not much change at the top. The top 3 did not really change anything. Switzerland is still at the top, followed by Singapore and the United States. In terms of Trinidad and Tobago, we are classified and still classified as an innovation-driven economy with a per capita income of US 21,311. So we are seen as being in the innovation stage of development. Now, if you look at the comparison between the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean, what's the average per capita income? Compared to Trinidad and Tobago, you would see why we are that position. Now, what are the other countries? We are playing in the big leagues. The most developed economies in the world are classified under the stage 3, the innovation stage of development. Now, we are the only country in Latin America and the Caribbean that is in that stage of development, that is in that stage as far as the index is concerned. Now, how did we do overall? As you can see, we did not change in our ranking. We held constant at position 89. Interestingly, however, our score, which was 4.0 last year, is now 3.9. Actually, it's 3.94. Now, you may say 3.94, 4.0, a difference of 0.06, 600ths of a space. That, however, cost us close to 7 to 8 spaces. Because if you look at the top-ranked countries, for instance, the difference between the country at number 1 and the country at number 15, the difference in score is 0.5. So had we maintained a score of 0.4, we'd have been in 80th place. So you see how sensitive the score is to this overall. So we have maintained our position at position 89. Our score is slightly a little lower. Now let's look at the web. The web would basically compare how you look vis-a-vis with other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So what we can see is that we are on par, more or less, in 11 of the 12 pillars. The one that where we fall a little short is market size, and you can understand why. We have a small population. 50% of this score is based on your domestic market size. So we tend to do bad in market size. Everything else, we are looking pretty okay. We are above normal compared to Latin America and the Caribbean. However, if we should put that in the context of developed economies, so what I did here was superimpose what is the average for these pillar scores for the developed economies, which is the place that we are in for the advanced developed economies in stage 3. We see that, we are a little off. In only 2 of the pillars now, which is macroeconomic environment and health and primary education, are we on par with the economies in the same stage of development as Trinidad and Tobago. So that is some food for thought there. Now, let's go into the pillars and the sub-indices. So I know you see a lot of figures here, but let's walk through each of this. What we have here is 3 years of data from 2013, 14, and 15, and we have all the pillars broken down by sub-indices. So we have the basic requirements, we have the efficiency enhancers, and the sophistication factors. I want us to pay attention to 3 out of those 12 pillars. Let's focus our attention on 3. The first one is that of institutions. Then we look at macroeconomic environment and innovation. So let's focus some attention on the pillar institutions. Now, institutions for me is ground zero as far as competitiveness is concerned. There's no, there's a reason why it is placed as the first pillar in basic requirement. It is the most basic of the basic requirements. And so we need to get institution right before we can go anywhere else. These are not the kind of centuries we want to be scoring. If you look at the whole idea and the whole score, an institution, it is sending a message that there is a public mistrust of public institution, officers, and people in office. And if you look at this one, you see that it went from 95, our rank went from 95 to 108, and the score is on a downward trend, which is not good. If we go to the macroeconomic environment, and I want to point out a few things there for you. These scores that are in blue from the last year ranking, if it's highlighted in blue, it is seen as a competitive advantage, which means that you are ranked at least in the top 50 for those dimensions. When you look at 2015, 2016, we see that we only have one competitive advantage now in macroeconomic environment, which means that we would have lost, we would have dropped below 50 in gross national savings, and that would have happened, one, because what we really, gross national savings is really our sovereign fund, the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, vis-a-vis our GDP, and the GDP increase, so that would have come down a bit. And then we've got to look at debt. Government debt, that's a little too high for comfort there, so that's something we need to be cognizant of as we go forward. The other one we need to look at is innovation. We are an innovation-driven economy, and again, these are not some of the centuries we want to be scoring. We need to be looking at things like university-industry collaboration, not only from the side of the university, but also the side of the industry and how we can collaborate in improving innovation there. We need to be looking at our capacity to innovate. And what does that mean? Because you see, we are moving a bit down in the ranking and the score there also. So these three are important pillars for our stage of development and what some of the fundamentals that we need to look at. Now, it's not all bad. There are a number of strong pillars strong dimensions, our credit rating, our quality of education and higher education. Interestingly, however, this list was a bit longer last year because we had more competitive advantages as opposed to competitive disadvantages. But we have maintained, by and large, most of our competitive advantages. On the downside, however, we still have all those factors concerning institutions, a few of our macroeconomic environment, and business and sophistication and innovation factors, which you can follow from your presentation, your 2-page there. One of the problems we have is that of data inertia. Now, as you said at the beginning, data is collected via the quantitative and qualitative means. The quantitative data is taken from the recognized international institutions. And what has happened over the years is that our data at these institutions are not updated on a regular basis. And for the third or fourth time in presenting this result, I'm going to make an appeal once again for us to get our data right and ensure that the CSO is functioning at its most efficient level. That can take us up a few spaces if we just get that right. Interestingly, if you look, for instance, at enrollment in higher education, it is the same score from last time. That's because the data did not move. And we are using, in most cases, data way back as 2007 for this. So it has not taken up our current spending and where we have progressed in terms of the quantitative data. So that is something we need to look at urgently. Now, problematic factors for doing business. I know you want to focus on the top problematic factors here. But I also want us to focus on the bottom part. The things that we don't have problem with, because we should applaud some of those things, like tax regulations, government stability, policy stability. It's good to know that these things are no longer or is not a problem. At the top of it, we see poor work ethic of the labor force, corruption, inefficient government bureaucracy, crime, and theft. Now, I want to take a time series look at this. Let's look at that information over the last 10 years. So I'm going to 2005, 2005, 10, and 15. What do you see there? Basically, the same problems we have been dealing with in the last 10 years, except for poor infrastructure, so at least we don't have that anymore as a major problem. But look at this. Poor work ethic. The last 10 to 15 years, we have fundamentally been dealing with the same issues. It has not changed. So what happens from year to year is that these things, depending on what is the prior, the point in time, would just shift spaces. But the top 5 problem has stayed the same since we have been doing this index. From a Caribbean perspective, interestingly, our highest ranked Caribbean country, which is Barbados, did not participate in the survey this year. And the reason I'm quoting from the report, in Barbados and Suriname, they said that the survey was not completed to the minimum requirements. And that could have a number of reasons for that. But when you look at it from a Caribbean perspective, we see that Jamaica, which is in stage 2, they're not in stage 3 like us. They are the highest ranked Caribbean country at 86. Then Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana is at 121. But look at it. More or less, we have some commonality here. And if you look at Barbados and Suriname results last year, it's the same sort of. So what we have is really a Caribbean connection in terms of inefficient government bureaucracy, crime and theft across the board. Interestingly, however, in the other Caribbean countries, work ethic has not been highlighted as an issue. So in summary, Trinidad and Tobago, we are still an innovation-driven economy. We have held our own in terms of our rank, but the score went down a bit. Institutional development, innovation, and business sophistication is still a cause for concern, and poor work ethic and corruption is seen as the most problematic factors for doing business. With that, I thank you.
Dr. Christo, thank you very much. You've done a great job, I think, explaining the index as a lead indicator for the future, as well as the 12 pillars. And the 3 areas in particular, the basic requirements, efficiency enhancers, innovation and sophistication, and the fact that we rank within that 3rd stage. And then you did a great synopsis in terms of how we compared with those within our Caribbean and Latin American region, and then how we compared against those that are within the same stage as us. And thanks again for highlighting the problems, which I'm sure we're all aware of, the problematic factors that we deal with in doing business here in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, the very important need for data on a national level. So thank you very much, Dr. Kislo, for that. Our second presenter is Professor Miguel Carrillo, Executive Director of the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business and a Professor of Strategy. He joins us this morning via video conferencing from London, and he will provide insights on the competitive rankings of different regions. Please help me to welcome him as he discusses the international perspective of competitiveness.
Thank you, Viola. Good morning. I hope that everything is right and everybody could hear me or see me. I allow me please to extend a special welcome to the Honorable Mr. Camille Robinson-Regis, Minister of Planning and Development, along with Permanent Secretary, Ms. Joan Burash, and as well the Deputy Permanent Secretary of Minister of Planning and Development, Ms. Aline. All protocols observed. As Dr. Kisto actually mentioned, we're talking about a new normal, and unfortunately, the new normal is not a positive or a favorable new normal. We're talking about emerging economies seriously cooling down, and the previous tailwinds that actually have supported the growth of these emerging economies, weaker US dollar and high commodity prices, those two trends have actually reversed. And that those are no great news for us. Now, from since this is the new normal, okay, one of the ways that we must try to escape with this new normal is obviously to improve dramatically our competitiveness. You know, we cannot afford to remain stagnated and just settle in this new normal, which is a combination of stagnation and recession. So, part of this not settling for the normal is obviously try to keep growing and keep growing in a sustainable way. And what is interesting about this graph is they basically compare a bunch of countries with different levels of income, from the high-income countries from the OECD, other high-income countries, and upper middle-income countries, and lower middle-income and low-income. And what you see in the other high-income is that we have Trinidad and Tobago there. And unfortunately, in the other high-income, we're considered one of the three least competitive economies in that particular batch. The fact that there are some interesting tensions between our level of economic development, which is our GDP per capita, and the kind of club that we belong to, which is innovation-driven, or I would say high-income economies. And really, truly, one of the things that we have to accept is that maybe from our income level perspective, we belong to that club, but maybe from our competitiveness perspective, productivity perspective, we might belong more to efficiency-driven economies than innovation-driven economies. But what this actual graph portrays is that countries that tend to be more competitive tend to naturally experience better levels of growth. Now, it's important to understand, to give an interesting revision of what drives competitiveness. And the base, you see the endowments, natural endowments, which in our case is really our oil and gas, mostly, and then macroeconomic competitiveness and microeconomic competitiveness. And one of the things that we have to understand is, okay, well, where should we start? And I think that, repeating what Dr. Christos said, ground zero is really basic requirements. And basic requirements basically deal mostly with macroeconomic competitiveness, where you put monetary and fiscal policies plus human development and effective political institutions. That's ground zero. We can talk a lot about the macroeconomic competitiveness that includes the quality of business environment, state of cost development, sophistication of company operational strategy. But one of the things that we would like to discuss a little bit more is the fundamentals, the basics. This graph is something that we have been presenting extensively, and it basically talks about how different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean actually have grown over the years in the last, between 2013 and between 2003 and 13, was the GDP per capita. And what you see basically is Trinidad and Tobago is, in the same level of growth as Antigua and Bermuda, Grenada. The problem is that we have been stagnated in that part of the equation. And you see other countries like Suriname or Peru or even Panama that actually have engaged very interesting sustainable growth over the years, and that is moving them steadily towards a better level of development. The key here is why there is so much of a wide spread on duration in terms of rates of growth over the years. And obviously that has to be explained mostly by our competitiveness. Now, one of the things that we have to understand is that how competitiveness is linked to growth. So Jeffrey Sachs, actually, which is the authority in poverty alleviation in the world, actually ran a very interesting research not long ago, which I personally call the science of growth. And one of the most important findings that he had was that open economies tend to grow much faster and in a more sustainable way than closed economies. Whether you are developed or developing country doesn't matter. What matters is not whether you are developed or developing. What matters is whether you're a closed economy or not. And over a research that he conducted over 88 countries and in 25 years, he measured some exogenous growth variables, and this is basically the story that he found out, with his team from Columbia University. He found that the most positive impact variables in explaining growth in a country is to have consistent open markets, to have an open economy, which is very important. And it is something that we must consider to really promote in Trinidad and Tobago. Obviously, we cannot just widely open the markets, but certainly to really take advantage of the few free trade agreements that we have and try to aggressively pursue more others, so we can connect our country with the rest of the world in a more efficient way, especially non-Caribbean markets, and even with much more emphasis to Latin America. What's interesting or what's happening in the world is that about 70% of the growth that happens in the world in terms of economic growth happens within the Pacific Basin, between Asia and the Americas. And that's a very important thing to understand, because we're going to focus our internationalization trajectory. We should focus on trying to start trading with countries that are positioned in the Pacific. The other most important positive impact in growth both in countries is to have a growth of economically active population. And it's something that so far the data has shown that it's something that is not necessarily happening in the whole Caribbean. We're stagnated at best, and our economically active population is actually not growing. The other aspect that actually explains growth is institutional quality. And that's where we have seen some level of stagnation as well in Trinidad and Tobago, and we have to work on it as well. And the other aspect that actually explains very much growth is central government budget balance, which based on the data that shared by Dr. Kisto, it's one of the variables that we have been struggling the most in the recent year. Now, from what are the most positive variables that impact growth to the list, to the top most negative variables that impact growth. Number one is you will have a barrier of growth if most of your exports are based on a natural resource or based on a commodity, which is somehow the case of Trinidad and Tobago. The second is if you already are a country that has good revenue or good income, that will actually be more. That will make you more difficult for you to keep growing once you have high level of income, which is the case of Trinidad. The fact that tropical location has actually been found to be an issue to promote growth, and the fact that have as well a landlocked location, which if you think about that, the fact that we're an island somehow resembles that we're not landlocked, but we're waterlocked. So it has similar impact. Now, the key here is that we must connect economic development with social development. That is the key. We cannot aspire to have one without the other. And it is important to understand the connection between economic and social development. Now, there has been some efforts in trying to measure social development through the Social Progress Index that we have shared in several forums right now at the school. This has been one of the most interesting approaches by World Bank and Harvard to basically measure social progress based on these different dimensions, basic needs, foundations of well-being and opportunity. And the graph that comes next is quite interesting. Let me just share the graph and then we'll explain. What you see in this graph is quite interesting. Since in the y-axis, basically you see the social progress index, and the x, you see the GDP per capita. One of the interesting things that you see is that there is no straight direct correlation between economic growth and social progress. There's really a curve. And I would say the richer the country, the wealthier the country, the less sensitive the curve is towards social progress. Now, what you see in the green dots, you see several countries that are really outliers, that are positive units, that actually have been able to get much more social progress index impact for the buck. And you see in part of these countries, you have Iceland, you have New Zealand, you have Uruguay, Costa Rica, and Jamaica, that are very much above the average in terms of their social progress vis-a-vis the GDP per capita. And you have the other counterpart, which are countries that, despite of their economic wealth, they have been struggle to reach some social progress. You have Kuwait, you have Russia, Kazakhstan, Yemen, and unfortunately, in this case, we have Trinidad and Tobago as part of this country that have to find a way to translate this economic wealth into social progress. You have here TTO is the dot for Trinidad and Tobago, just closer to Israel. So that is the real challenge that we have, is trying to really link economic development to social progress. Now, let's focus a little bit on human development and effective institutions. And from that perspective, try to identify a few of what we call competitiveness triggers, which is, okay, what will be the things that we should actually focus really on in the coming years that will actually make a huge difference in terms of competitiveness? Well, we were able to identify a few. One of them are the structural triggers. And one very important is to significantly increase the quality of our domestic transport network, since there is a huge loss of productivity in the road. The fact that we have to spend a lot of time distributing our goods will actually increases our lack of productivity in a big way. And the other structural part that we have to work is what we call the administrative infrastructure, particularly the two areas, which is the burden of customs procedures and the burden of some government regulations. We can fix those two things. Actually, will have a very interesting impact on the whole competitiveness in the short term. The other interesting trigger should be the government procurement of advanced technology products. We have not been great at actually adopting the latest, or what I call first generation technologies, not only at the government level, but as well in the private sector level. And whenever you have that, you give the big push towards sophisticating as well in the market for buyers and products and services. Now, some of the good news, and this is somehow a reflection of the data lag that Dr. Kristen has been mentioned before, but Trinidad and Tobago is one of the top, one of the telecom economies that actually have improved the most in the last year in the ease of doing business. Actually, if you see Trinidad and Tobago along all these different countries, have gone to spot number 79 in ease of doing business rank. And basically, the areas of improvement in starting a business, getting credit, and resolving issues related to the insolvency. Those measures had actually triggered Trinidad to better places in terms of ease of doing business, which is great. And this is some of the data related to what composes that rank. You can actually access to this rank very easily, Business World Bank, and you can take a look at these numbers. But there has been a significant increase in competitiveness in this regard, but the data has not been able to catch up with the ranking so far. Now, other competitiveness trigger that is important is related to the context of strategy and rivalry, and this is what I call a little bit more behavioral dimensions of competitiveness. And again, you found the cooperation, the labor-employee relations has been one of the huge issues here. That we assume that is much more a behavioral, cultural issue than an economic one, and the other is pay and productivity. We can fix those things, plus the intensity of local competition and efficacy of corporate boards, that could actually have a very interesting domino effect in improving our competitiveness. And the other competitive trigger is to try to increase and focus on criminal strategy and operational effectiveness in 4 radical dimensions. We have to change our nature to competitive advantage from being resource-based to being competence or knowledge-based. This is something very important. We have been talking a lot about diversification, but really and truly the most important aspect of competitiveness is not necessarily what we do, but how we do it. And the more knowledge we inject in whatever we sell, whatever services we sell or we export, whatever product we sell or we export, we're slowly but truly changing the nature of competitive advantage. Now, again, we don't have a culture of spending on R&D. We do spend some money in development, but not really truly. Very few companies have a deliberate innovation budget or have certain money to spend on designing business experiments or spin-offs or new ventures. So that is really affecting our competitiveness, and as well, obviously, by extension, our capacity for innovation. But maybe what really is could be the best trigger and the actual factor that might have a biggest behavioral effect, positive behavioral effect on our competitiveness is a degree of customer sophistication and mostly customer orientation. We don't have, unfortunately, in Trinidad and Tobago, a history of great customer service that is actually across the board in the Caribbean, and we're trying to export services. That is something that is critical to change, and that is very well within our behavior and our culture. The other competitive trigger, and that is something that Dr. Kisto already mentioned, is the strength of public institutions, which I won't go there, that's more than obvious. So we have to work on the basics. But at the end of the day, the real competitiveness challenge, I think, is about 2 things. The first thing is to really embark in a social evolution movement with an economic strategy. There are a lot of things that we have to change in the economy, yes, but all those changes must be coupled with some sort of change in certain and particular behaviors that are really affecting our capacity to create value. But maybe the key message that we want is not only that we have to focus our economic strategy to include a very important deliberate social change movement, but also that we have to understand that, especially in this era of no growth, on potential recession, we have to understand one thing, that there is no return without risks. There is no return without risks. And some of the things that we have to think about in this particular period is what will be the risks that we must take now, that we cannot afford not to take, so we can embark in a path of a more sustainable social and economic evolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Carrillo, for that very detailed presentation. I'm sure that we all learned a little bit more. Yes, am I right? Yes. And thank you so much for synthesizing what our competitiveness challenge really is, which is a social evolution with an economic strategy. At this time, we would like to invite the Honorable Camille Robinson-Regis, Minister of Planning and Development, to deliver this morning's keynote address. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Thank you very kindly for that welcome and good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Ms. Fayola Nicholas, Director, Advancement and Alumni Relations, and the Chairman of today's proceedings, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Aileen Allen Ovid, Chairman, members of the Board, Executive Director, and faculty members of the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business, sponsors of this event, IGov-TT and PowerGen, representatives of government ministries, representatives of chambers and associations, notably the TTMA, the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber, the Energy Chamber, the British Chamber, and the TTCSI, members of the panel, specially invited guests, viewers logged on from Suriname, Guyana, Guatemala, and Ghana, online live stream attendees, members of the media. I feel especially privileged to be able to spend some time with you here today and to share some thoughts on our country's direction as we participate with so many other countries in the release of the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report 2015 to 2016. Indeed, the fact that we here in Trinidad and Tobago are participating in this global event is indicative of the very connectedness of the global economy and how each one of us, though maintaining our independence and sovereignty, is still interdependent and must recommit to strengthening each other as we strengthen ourselves. Allow me from the onset to commend the management and staff of the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School of Business for your partnership with the architects of the World Economic Forum and for taking the leading role in innovative thinking and strategy development across disciplines in Trinidad and Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, it is that willingness to forge effective partnerships, to push the envelope further, to eschew xenophobia, and to revel in a climate of transparency, trust, and truth, so aptly demonstrated by institutions such as this one, that allow the government of which I have the honor to be a part to compete and compete successfully in the not too recent past. In this regard, you have my assurance that as Minister of Planning and Development, I will continue to ensure that the doors of government are not open only to a select few, but rather will be thrown wide open to ensure that, like Arthur Lockjack himself, the country's best and brightest are afforded every opportunity to create, to think, to develop, and to lead. It is no secret that ours is a small, open island economy that must export to prosper in the 21st century. Our success will be dependent on building international competitiveness in a global arena that is in a constant state of flux and uncertainty, and in which, for all intents and purposes, we either compete successfully or die. Unfortunately, the indices over the last few years seem to indicate that as a country, our level of competitiveness has been relatively stagnant. We appear to have become firmly attached to position number 89 out of the 144 countries surveyed and a score of 4.0. though, as Dr. Kisto pointed out, this figure has declined slightly to 3.9 for 2015. Before the rigor mortis of our uncompetitiveness sets in then, we must act with determination and alacrity. The time for hiding behind the lame excuses of the past is long gone. And while the country's economic indicators for the second quarter of 2015, which were only released a few days ago, point to us being either on the cusp of a recession, to borrow the phraseology of your former director, Dr. Rolf Balgomin, or sliding precipitously down the slope, this government will continue to fan the flames of hope for those of us who continue to have boundless faith in our destiny, until they become the raging fires that burn deep within our collective Trinbagonian hearts. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to one of the key points which we must collectively consider if we are to stem the tide of our apparent uncompetitiveness, and that is the availability and reliability of accurate data in a timely manner that allows for more efficient and effective decision-making. The central bank released the economic data for the first quarter of 2015 a few days before September 7th, and for the second quarter of 2015 only last Friday. With a central bank staff that increased dramatically in the last couple of years, there's every hope that the data emanating from this institution would be more timely and more readily available to those of us charged with the responsibility of making the right decisions required in these economic times. Undoubtedly, if we are to compete successfully, we must be provided with data that is accurate, data that is relevant, data that is timely, and data that is readily available. It is the very absence of an efficient and accurate system of data collection that led to Trinidad and Tobago facing the ignominy of a Moody's downgrade. There can be no denying that the Central Statistical Office has been sorely neglected over the last few years. It is reprehensible that this most important pillar in the data capture and analysis architecture of our country has been left in such a parlous state that the published data emanating from this once respected institution has more than once been found to be unreliable and is often of questionable quality, leading inexorably to a loss of confidence in this very important institution. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the assurance that this government understands the critical importance of data-driven decision-making in both the private and public sectors. Additionally, we undertake to bring to the Parliament the Draft Statistical Act and create an independent statistical institute with a board comprised of representatives drawn from the public sector, including the central bank, the private sector, the universities, the market research organizations, and professional statisticians. This independent institute that is expected to be developed will be led, managed, and staffed by competent professionals and funded either by the government entirely or through support from the IDB. And that is on the table for discussion with the IDB. The information emanating from the institution will then be made available to all involved in crucial decision-making capacities that require hard, solid, accurate data. There is another point that has to be made in this regard. There is a saying that if people like you, they will listen to you. If they trust you, they will do business with you. I notice you all are listening to me, so I assume you like me. This country's reputation as a preferred business partner has suffered immense damage over the last few years, largely as a result of the cancellation or abandonment of several projects and the violation of contractual agreements, the cost of which, both in terms of money and international reputation, we are still counting. Trinidad and Tobago has been able to attract billions of dollars worth of direct foreign investment because we were seen as being an ideal geographic location, as having a highly intelligent workforce, abundant natural resources, and a vibrant, stable democracy. Irrespective of changes in governments, our governance model respected and honored contracts entered into by a previous regime, unless they could have been proven to be demonstrably injurious to the country's economic health. As a government, we intend to return to that model and thereby ensure that we will once again be able to look our multinational partners in the eye with the firm resolve that our word is our bond. We believe our global competitiveness can only increase if other countries first trust us enough to do business with us. Foreign direct investment will not flow into Trinidad and Tobago unless it is actively pursued by both the government and the private sector. The recent commissioning of the Caribbean Gas Chemicals Limited plant on the Union Estate in Nabre, for example, is a magnificent example of this active pursuit of diversification options by the Massey Group of companies, which found a suitable partner in the Mitsubishi giant. The success of this plant is owed in no small way to the facilitation made possible by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to suggest, though, that there's another way to increase our country's attractiveness as a preferred business destination, and in so doing, contribute to the improvement of our global competitiveness. It is through the appointment of competent personnel to our embassies and high commissions and consulates. Our key pursuit must be our economic and commercial interests, and these must be understood by our senior diplomats and the professional foreign service officers. We believe our global competitiveness will increase as well when we honestly identify our country's unique selling proposition. What is it we have here that no one else has? It's not only sun, sea, and sand. It's not only oil and gas. It's not only intellectual capital. I posit that it's the vibrancy and creativity of our people. That is what created the steel pan. It's the innovativeness that allows for a thriving bacon shark trade in Maracas and nowhere else in the world. It's the daring that allows doubles vendors to create a product that Indians from the subcontinent find difficult to replicate. It's the rhythm of a good groovy soca tune or an old Kaiso Lavway laced with double entendre that few on the outside could understand, but which bends us over with laughter. It's our creativity that allows us to transform the streets of this country into teeming masses of carefree masqueraders, resplendent in all the colors of the rainbow, in one giant celebration of life. It is, I posit, that creativity, that innovativeness, that rhythm, that daring that will cause our oil and gas sectors to thrive once more and our manufacturing sector to thrive. It is that willingness to identify what is uniquely ours that will see our agricultural sector become once again a thing of beauty to behold, and our tourism sector to finally take off. But I ask you the question today, what is really holding us back? What is causing us to not realize our truest and fullest potential? What is causing us to remain at position number 89 with a score of 4.0 out of 7? There's ample empirical evidence to state that the contribution of the manufacturing sector to the national economy has been in steady decline since 2012. This stands in stark contrast to the 2002 to 2010 period, when real output in the sector grew by 100% from US 4 billion in constant prices to US 8 billion. Undeniably then, the re-emergence of the manufacturing sector as a major economic force to be reckoned with will depend on the government being able to ensure that proper and appropriate strategies are developed in partnership with local manufacturers to create and sustain a more enabling environment to facilitate increased global competitiveness of local business. Additionally, attention will be paid to the implementation of a system of constant dialogue and feedback with all stakeholders in the commercial, manufacturing, and industrial sectors to proactively address challenges such as shortages of skilled labor, difficulties in obtaining foreign exchange, reduction of bureaucracy, speedy processing of customs documentation, trade liberalization, and other regulatory issues affecting competitiveness and the ease of doing business. The stagnation of our competitive score, the lack of advance in our global ranking, and the absence of dynamism and growth in our economy signal that the time has come for a national competitiveness strategy, which has been eluding us for some time. This strategy, together with our commitment to build a vibrant national innovation ecosystem with supporting values, structures, and competencies, will be crucial in addressing our country's competitiveness challenge. As leaders in your businesses and in your communities, as the innovators in academia, as members of government, all of us must recognize and accept the critical role we must each play if Mother Trinidad and Tobago is to succeed. There is no time for political posturing, nor is there place for partisanship. The current economic times require some challenging decisions, and the demand will be made of all of us to put our shoulders to the wheel. As a country, we must take advantage of the rapid advances in technology to improve efficiency and productivity and to create new avenues for dynamic entrepreneurship through innovation. Innovation, therefore, must permeate our sustainable development agenda, our school curricula, and be at the core of our efforts to address important issues such as climate change, energy efficiency, resource management, and disaster preparedness and management. Transforming Trinidad and Tobago, ladies and gentlemen, into a high-income country with a diversified and competitive growth economy depends, therefore, on the adoption of innovative initiatives across all sectors, especially those 7 areas already identified as growth drivers. This involves tapping into our creative talents, fueled by human ingenuity and leveraging creativity and new ideas for enterprise development. Ladies and gentlemen, to this end, the draft National Innovation Policy, which was prepared in June 2015 by officers within the Ministry of Planning and Sustainable Development, as it then was, will, in the not too distant future, be the subject of focused stakeholder engagement with a view toward finalization and implementation. This government's growth strategy is premised on building several different but interlocking capabilities. These include entrepreneurship, management, innovation, and ability to adapt quickly to changes in the global economy, productivity, and internal competitiveness. 7 focal areas have already been identified on which the diversification thrust will now be based. The manifesto of the People's National Movement has been adopted by the Cabinet as official government policy, and therefore these include agriculture and agro-processing, maritime services, fish and fish processing, aviation services, the creative industries, financial services, software design and application. Ours it is the challenge to cement our place in the global context. We must uproot deeply embedded behavioral and cultural norms, as Professor Carrillo and Dr. Kisto said. We can no longer drop the waste next to the bin and leave it to the cleaners. We must recognize that we are in this together. As such, I encourage you gathered here today and all citizens to facilitate the creation and strengthening of partnerships, not the People's Partnership. Fostering partnerships among government, labor, and private sector will strengthen our efforts at economic growth, productivity, and competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, the time for greater collaboration and partnering is now. Concomitant with the National Innovation Policy will be the articulation of the next National Development Plan for Trinidad and Tobago, which is called Vision 2030. This plan will guide and refine strategic interventions and focus future investments aimed at closing the development gap and achieving inclusive and sustainable socio-economic growth. Vision 2030 will be framed within the context of the new Global Development Agenda, which was agreed to by heads of state and government at the United Nations Summit only last week in New York. His Excellency, the President of the Republic, also mentioned this new agenda at the ceremonial opening of Parliament on September 23rd, 2015. To strengthen the national planning process, the Economic Development Board will be refocused to develop and maintain a model of the economy that would permit analysis of short and long-term impacts of alternative policies and investments, amongst other activities. In essence, the new Economic Development Board will become a national think tank with a medium and long-term focus, which is essential for economic development and transformation. The government understands the need to deal with the malignant issues of inefficiency and cumbersome bureaucracy, access to finance, and this government will use strategic policy instruments at our disposal to create the necessary environment that will allow businesses to grow, create more jobs, expand exports, and become global. Our further commitment is to eliminate corruption and introduce whistleblower legislation and other legislation and actions to eliminate corruption at all levels. Indeed, we believe that successfully weaving together public policy and business strategy will be the fast track to increase competitiveness and drive growth. Better governance and detailed policy based on research and evidence is a clear prerequisite for weaving together public and private sector strategies. We must banish our inefficient and cumbersome bureaucracy as an unwanted shackle of days past. Through a more effective partnership with our business leaders, academia, and labor, we will create an environment that will allow businesses to grow, create more jobs, expand exports, and become global. Sitting here this morning, I noted the issues raised by Professor Carrillo and Dr. Kisto, and I'd like to say that we have begun discussions with the IDB on resolving the issue of the mass transit mechanism that will go toward eliminating one of our development challenges. We have also continued discussion on the single window for ease of doing business. Excuse me. And as you are aware, during the elections, the People's National Movement signed a memo of understanding with JTAM, and that forms the basis of our relationship with the labor unions. Ladies and gentlemen, over the years, there has been a flawed national perspective that our GCI ranking is a sole reflection of government's policy. However, the GCI is a survey of private business establishments, and the score on several of the pillars are reflective of the action or inaction also of the private sector. As such, the GCI must be seen as more than a useful guide for government. It must be seen as a call to immediate and decisive action for private businesses. As business owners, leaders, and managers, you have the ability to influence many of the indicators that can improve our GCI ranking. As you prepare to return to this hall next year for a rehash of these results, a score of 4.0 and a rank of 89 again, I am not. Dare we to dream that we can improve by 10 points every year for the next 5 years. Dr. Kisto? And increase our score by 0.5 annually over the same period. And if we are to achieve these scores, how can you, in the field of business and academia, bring us to that point? Dare we to dream, ladies and gentlemen, that by 2020, we will be well on our way to having a knowledge-based, thriving, globally competitive economy, sufficiently diversified so that no crisis in any one sector becomes the sword of Damocles over the rest of the economy. If we are to turn these dreams into reality, then all of us as stakeholders need to do some introspection. To the captains of industry present today, ask yourselves, how can you increase your company's expenditure on research and development and its technological readiness and absorption? How can you as a business leader tap into the collective abilities to venture into strategic, knowledge-intensive areas that are connected to the needs and markets of the world? How can you, who determine the direction of our universities, develop curricula that are more relevant to the needs of this new society? As government, we know we have to work to improve governance and the business environment to facilitate gains in competitiveness. I am sure we can do this together. Whilst resources are limited, the human potential embodied in our imagination, creativity, and talent are limitless. As we look to 2030, Trinidad and Tobago cannot continue to be a society in which large groups of persons continue to underperform and underachieve, or are content to rely on perpetual support from the state. the development of a propitious environment for economic diversification and value creation is not only the responsibility of government, but also of academia, business, labor, and civil society. As such, I urge all citizens to contribute their time, ideas, skills, and talents to the national good. It is only with this coalition of effort that Trinidad and Tobago can take its place amongst the advanced nations of the world. This will be the platform on which we will build Vision 2030. I repeat what Professor Carrillo said. There is no return without risks, and we do need greater returns. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the honor of your attention, and may God continue to bless the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for those inspirational words to achieve our fullest potential as a diversified and competitive growth economy. And just to let you know, before we move on to the next section, the presentations that were made this morning by both Dr. Kisto as well as Professor Carrillo will be made available on our website for you to download. And Dr. Kisto as well as Professor Carrillo will be available to meet with you and your teams to provide greater insights to your organizations. So feel free to contact the WEF after today's event. We now move on to our panel session, which will include questions from our esteemed audience. If you do have questions, you would have received cards within your packages. Please write your questions on your card and raise the cards up. And we have runners who will collect the cards from you and feed it to the panelists on stage. We have a wonderful panel this morning, which comprises a mix of both the public and private sectors. They will share their views on the competitiveness agenda of Trinidad and Tobago. And as I introduce each of the panelists, can you please join me on stage? First of all, we have our moderator, Mr. Ian Chinapoo. His career spans more than 17 years in banking and finance throughout the Caribbean and Central American region. He has held positions of Managing Director, Regional Corporate and Investment Banking, and Managing Director of a major international bank operating in the Caribbean. Mr. Chinapoo is the Executive Director of the Unitrust Corporation and also an adjunct faculty at LOCJAC Graduate School of Business. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Ian Chinapoo. Joining us as panelist number one, we have Ms. Dawn Callender. She joined the Board of Directors of Republic Bank Limited in 2011, and she heads the corporate strategy function at the Power Gen Company of Trinidad and Tobago. With over 10 years' experience at the executive management level, Ms. Callender is a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants and a certified public accountant. She holds an MBA from Henley Management College in the UK and has research interests in the fields of strategy and leadership. Please help me welcome Ms. Callender. And finally, we have Mr. Dave Ramkisoon. Mr. Dave Ramkisoon is the Chief Executive Officer of the EIL Group of Companies and a Director of the WEF-GSB's Biz Booster Incubator. Dave's career began as an office boy, leaving his job to start a successful electrical distribution business. A trail of acquisitions followed, beginning with Trinidad Cables Limited in 1987, then Electrical Industries Limited from Neil and Massey Group in 1997, and the assets of Agos Manufacturing in 2009, and most recently, Century Eslon in 2011. EIL is now the largest manufacturing group in the Caribbean of electrical wire and cable, switchgear, PVC, pipe, and lighting fixtures. As a director of WEF-GSB's Biz Booster, he is very passionate about assisting entrepreneurs grow their business. Let us welcome Mr. Ramkisoon. I now hand over proceedings to Mr. Chinapoo.
Okay, good morning all. Glad to recognize your Honourable Minister. Thank you, and I think we were all inspired by your words. You covered a lot of the major points, and hopefully we can get down to business on the panel and address some of those concerns that you also recognize. And of course, recognize Dr. Kisto and Professor Carrillo, because I think you encapsulated all the high points that we must consider as we go forward on the panel this morning. So we consider ourselves a working panel, and I think across the table here you have folks who've been exposed. You have a master entrepreneur, you have a master accountant, and I'm a humble banker. So I thank you for having us here with you today. We will have a time for some questions and answers from the audience. So as our chairperson for today's proceedings said, please feel free to ask some questions via the cards you've presented. But now allow me just to make some opening comments and invite the other panelists to make their comments on the GCI report that we've all received very, very recently today as we synchronize the launch across the world. First and foremost, I think all the speakers before us would have indicated that we have not moved very much. In fact, by scores, you would say we would have fallen a bit from 4.2 to 3.94, as Dr. Kisto pointed out. We have some recurring issues, our work ethic, the issues of corruption, overall productivity being our major issue. We are ranked as in the innovation stage 3 category. However, that's primarily so because of our GDP per capita, which is over 21,000. When you look at stage 1 and stage 2, you realize we have much work to do in infrastructure as well as in efficiency. And I think that was the call to arms that we just got from Minister Robinson-Wages. Let me also point out some facts that I noticed just doing some analysis. In the figures, when you look at Trinidad and Tobago's GDP, roughly US $28.8 billion as of most recent data, that works out to about 0.04% of global GDP. But when you look at our population, which is denominated in the GDP calculation, we at 1.4 billion people, looking at about 7 billion people across the world, we are 0.02% of the world's population. So you will see where our above average GDP per capita standing comes from. But that does not mean we don't have a lot to do, and I think that is where we are. So I will allow some opening statements from the other panelists today, and then we'll get into questions and hopefully into your questions as we go forward. Allow me to ask Mrs. Callan to start, and please share your thoughts on the report as presented.
Good morning. Good morning, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. I also want to recognize the minister, who is a school colleague, if I could dare disclose that we've gone back such a long time, and also the permanent secretary. Welcome, hello, also to Dr. Kisto. And I also recognize all the comments that were made. I think the thing that struck me this morning in listening to all the persons who spoke before is the holistic nature of the report and the recognition of that holistic nature of the report. That really the report touches on a number of factors. And I think it has to be commended in that regard. You know, it's not just looking at output or economic activity. It really is looking at the foundations of the society, the institutions, the structures and so on that are in place that would eventually propel a society into being competitive and into being productive. So from that perspective, I think it's a very balanced kind of indicator, and that is where it will point to many of the issues that we have to continue to work on as a society. Yes, we do have a very high per capita GDP, but what does that mean for us living and operating in Trinidad and Tobago? What is the source of that? Is it really our personal efforts? I mean, do we feel when we interact in our day-to-day business activities that we live in a society that would have a statistic like that? I think we do know that the answer to that might be no, and therefore it leaves the opportunity for us to drill down further into some of those pillars, some of those indicators where we have work to do, and also that will also be the impetus that would really propel us up the scale from our score of 89, place of 89, and that score of 3.94, because as we move up and as we do better, we would see that reflected in those scores.
Yeah, well, good morning, and I want to thank the Lock Truck School of Business for inviting me to this forum. When I look at the Global Competitive Index report, it's sad to see that we haven't moved as a nation. And as an entrepreneur for the past 30 years, we in the private sector, we face a lot of problems. And I remember one day, I think it was Dr. Balgame was telling me that he said, in spite of all the problems that we encounter, we have to succeed. And I think this has been the challenge for us as an entrepreneur. Sometimes it has been very painful and very tough, because when you look at things like poor work ethics, corruption, now you have the inability to access foreign currency, all these things have come into the fore. And well, this one is a new one, and I see a problem emerging when I look at this whole report and I try to connect the dots. I see a nation thirsting for leadership. That's what I see. And I was looking at and observing the last election campaign, and I pulled out some tidbits from Dr. Rowley's comments, and he said this election is about decency. He said it's about truth, and he said it's about trust. And then when they ask him, what is the problem? Is it economic or is it crime? He said, no, it's governance. Very, very powerful words, and all of them so true. But what are these things pointing to? When Professor Corello speaks about a social evolution and an economic strategy, and a business, a social evolution and a business strategy, how are all these things that Dr. Rowley spoke about, how is it connected to this score here? I know there are lots of other factors like institutional building, innovation. These things are important, but you know what? My view is that it starts with leadership. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Rowley about 6 weeks ago. And I told him something. I told him that, you know, the people in this country, they are sad, they are depressed, they are angry, because for so long they haven't had leadership. They need a leader who could love them, who could take care of them, a leader who could speak the truth. And he said that that's the kind of leader that he wants to be. And I told him something. I said, you know, in spite of all these things that are happening, when I'm coming from a country away, and just before that plane hit the ground, I feel that I'm in paradise. I said, that's how much I love this country. And he looked at me and he said, you know, sir, that's exactly how I feel. And I think the message and the signal that I'm getting from our present leader, if we walk that talk, I think we are going to see a change in this global competitive index by that alone, because that is signaling the start of a social evolution, which we need in this country, much more than the economic strategy or business strategy. I wanted to tell you something. You know, it's the same thing in business as in the country. Where I come from, the challenge I face a social challenge in how do we deal with work ethics, for example. Work ethic in a place. You know, last night I left work about 7:30. We were packing 8 containers for export. And I look at my people working 7:30, 8 o'clock in the night. And I'm looking at this and they're telling us that we have poor work ethic. So we could work. We could work. All we need is a leader that could inspire us, could influence us, could clear the way, move barriers, respond to the challenges that we face. And we will build a great nation. That's my take on it. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Robinson. I also believe treaty can work. But that's something that we have seen consistently in reports that we've shown poor work ethic as one of our weaknesses as we go forward. It has been a problem for quite some time. So, putting the question to Dawn, as Mr. Rapporteur has come forward, what do you see as a contributing factor to this national view? And we know it's a survey, so this is a view of a cross-section of the population. What do you see as a contributing factor to this, and how do we get out of it?
Well, first of all, I want to say that, the issue of having surveys and so is that it really would come up with an average perception and so. And at either side of those averages, you do have excellence, and at the same time, you have great room for opportunities. So I do also support the view of my fellow panelists that there are areas in Trinidad and Tobago where people work long and stintedly towards development of this country. Certainly, a lot of my colleagues throughout my life, I've had the fortune to work with a lot of people who have demonstrated that kind of work ethic. Unfortunately, I don't think that exists in an even manner throughout the society. And maybe part of the reason for that is that we are an oil and energy type economy. Our earnings are based on external factors. They are based on whatever the world market prices are for those commodities. And at times, we have enjoyed extremely high prices. And through government policy and so on, we have redistributed those resources. And the average person in Trinidad and Tobago would earn a fair wage, a fair salary, so to speak, and can live quite comfortably, perhaps more so than would be reflective of their individual efforts. And of course, I'm saying that we do have pockets of excellence and so on, but I think if we look across the board, we would recognize that there may not be that direct correlation between people's particular efforts and the amount of wages they can earn. So from that point of view, I think in terms of dealing on the other side of a service exchange, you will find that you do encounter a poor work ethic from the person who's serving you, because that person doesn't have to give the output commensurate with the level of earnings they have. So I think there is an issue of the source of those earnings, the input required for people to do those earnings, to get those earnings. I think also, if I take a bit of a broader look, besides looking at individuals and maybe organizations, we do have, I think, some challenges here as a society. I like to think, for example, about the issue of traffic jams, the inefficiency of traffic jams, the whole psychology, people trying to avoid traffic jams, what that has built up in the society. Whether people try to leave before the traffic, after the traffic, because you don't want to spend long hours on the road. The fact that we have a very centralized, access to services. A lot of people do come into Port of Spain, which means that they are spending all of that time on the road. It is going to affect the person's frame of mind when they come to deliver services. Maybe their preoccupation of, again, avoiding traffic as they make their way home. Schooling, for example, where children are placed in schools and the need to shuttle them through and forth. So I would say it's a number of factors, some personal, some institutional, some that we can attack at the level of the state.
Noted, and I would also like to know that the Honorable Prime Minister spoke about the unique culture. And I think in your speech, Minister, you mentioned as well that we have to break that cycle of expectation so that people actually realize they have to do honest days work for an honest day's pay. But coming back to this question, I know if you started to get into it, but going beyond EIL, and I think that fact you created a culture of productivity there, and applying that to the wider society and business in particular, within your background. How do you see, or what factors do you think we can, advice we can give the wider population how to get out of this perception that we have of hope?
Well, what has happened in Trinidad is we started off by having what you call a poor work ethic. But now what I'm seeing is it has been institutionalized. And that's scary because the strategy to deinstitutionalize that becomes even a tougher battle. But can it be done? I think so, because as a true Trini, and I am a true Trini, I love this country too bad, is that I think Trini, they have a good heart. And I think if they could trust the leader, if they could believe in him, and if he could do what he say he's going to do, it will trigger an automatic change in the mindset of our people. And that will contribute significantly. If you look at the words that he used, all those words will contribute to a change in that mindset of, of power ethic. From a business perspective, what I'm seeing is that it's a significant challenge. Look, in our place, I would admit, we have a lot of problems. But you know what? If we could get our people to buy into where we want to go, what is it that we are dreaming of? If you can connect them to what role they have to play in that story, if you could contribute to the development so that they could be equipped to help us make that journey, and then how do we incentivize them? Those are some of the things we could do to change the work ethic. But I think we need also a leadership that is willing to serve. Sometimes we have leaders who lead with knowledge, but you don't lead with knowledge. You lead using knowledge. And there's a difference. Leader must serve, they must be humble, they must have professional wit, they must have a sense of direction, and they must bring the people together to make that journey. Lee Kuan Yew did that in Singapore with a piece of rock. And he said that all he had was his people. So while it has been institutionalized here, I think it might be one of those challenges for our present Prime Minister to look at and set the stage. Because you know what? If our leaders start off by doing the right thing, it will have a domino effect in the business. We are connected. We need you to do the right thing so that we could be inspired also to do the right thing. As they say, if leaders do what is right, the people do what they have to do. So it's difficult, but not impossible. And some of these things that I mentioned before, I think they will contribute a lot to changing the mindset of our people. Because treated by nature are really nice people. They go away and they work hard. And why they work hard? Because the culture there is a disciplined culture. It's a culture of execution. There's leadership, and it's about value creation. It's about protecting value. We need to just add that we want to enjoy that process, and we want to be in a position where we could serve and contribute to one another's well-being. All these things will help to change the culture. So that's my take on it.
Thanks, Dave. I think that's very insightful because I think we all know the stories of how the United States became great. They took immigrants from all over the world, including the Caribbean,
Yeah.
and so the same feedstock is what has achieved their productivity objectives. So what I heard from what you said was leadership, the ability to inspire trust and confidence, and service and leadership. And the first point you made is you have to understand and align with those and not use our cultural propensity to have fun against us in the sense that the organization must be able to align that culture to the strategy and get that engagement. Allow me to share Anthony Ali, who is a Trinidadian who runs the borders with the most international companies from the Caribbean. And they faced an enormous challenge after 9/11 because they were a company that provided all the food on the airplanes. And all of a sudden, the plane was flying. So, but then they realized that what they had was access to a very restricted area, an airport. So they got into doing check-ins, doing baggage handling, all the same people who were previously preparing the food. And he did that by achieving a 96% level. So when you spoke, that reminded me of a conversation I had I had with that. So
I
we
wonder,
will-
I wonder before we leave, if I could just also add that I think one of the things that everybody can contribute in this regard is really on the area of discipline. You know, we go back to our watchwords about discipline, tolerance, and production. And when you work in some of the companies and some of the countries that we're talking about, there is a great deal of discipline. You know, people can rely on you. People know, for example, that they expect you at 9 or whatever the time is in the morning, and you will be there. And all of that will call for a great deal of personal discipline. In Trinidad, when we're at home, because we've become maybe a little more relaxed and perhaps our employers are forgiving, understanding, or maybe themselves demonstrating some discipline, we do tend to fall into these other lax habits. So I would say as individuals, our personal commitment to assist in developing our country would be for us to be a bit more disciplined.
It's watchwords. I think that when you look at group ethic, it's all about it. That's very good. So we spent some time on group ethic. I'd like to move on to another key area, pillar one, our institution. I remember the last panel I was on, which is Transparency Institute. Dr. Rowley, then the opposition leader, attended, and he asked a question. And the comment came out that pointed me very strongly at the time was that we are not feeling as a people, but our institutions are feeling us. So this survey has further brought that to light. So when we look at this, it has also been a corrective problem for us. And we accept that to some extent this is a cultural problem. So what I want to put to the panel today is who do we hold responsible for this? And where do we start to fix it ultimately? Today,
You mean talk about the institution?
our institutions
Yeah.
have to do it. So why does it take so long to get to this from the public sector?
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
speak to the fact that I think we all have probably had some experience with this, having to do with transfer ownership of the vehicle. You have to take a day off to do that or to get your driver's permit. I decided when I had to renew my passport the last time that I'm going to not call a friend. I'm going to go and apply and stand up in the line. And I did that in February of this year. I was traveling in July the 7th. I got my passport on July the 5th. After they told me to come back on April, then May, then June. You know, so why does that happen? I speak about, I'm on the board of the international school, and we hired a teacher there, a specialist teacher in November. And in May, he told us, we haven't yet got the work permit, I have to take a job somewhere else. Because I can't support my family if I wait on your work permit. So these are things that we have to ask ourselves. And we are in the business of foreign direct investment. We are in the business of attracting multinationals. I think the minister said we're going to look them in the eye and tell them you can trust us. How do we do that when they depend on our institutions that do not seem to behave in the way that the institutions for the countries that are at the top of the scale that they behave? So, where is the level playing field for them?
Well, I started by saying that we have to succeed in spite of these things, and it will be so nice if we are succeeded and we do have to worry about the problems that we face with the institutions. But institutions, for me, when I look at institutions, they are just like your internal support units in a business, like your finance department, your distribution department, your IT department. I mean, just try to figure out what happens in your business when one or two or three of your support units start to fail, or your marketing department not executing, or your production department have all kinds of problems inside there. And then juxtapose that against the country. And you'll understand, because in a small company like the EIG group of companies, our problems, we might have IT issues, or we may have HR issues, for instance, and I don't know how that will impact on the country. Maybe in a very minute way, but when we look at the customs and excise, the Bureau of Standards, and we go into these institutions that service the entire country, and you encounter these problems. It's a horse of a different color. And I think we need to look at the Global Competitive Index over the last couple of years and see how the institutions, how they are failing us. And we need to understand how that is impacting on our competitiveness and the frustration that it is that it's causing all the people. And the government has a role to play because most of these institutions, they are under their watch. So they have to go through that score in detail by line item and identify exactly what strategic initiative they'll want to take to improve on each one of them. I would suggest that they start, and the Honorable Minister of Planning and Development hit the nail on the head when she said that they are going to put competent people in these state boards, etc., and the embassy, which apparently wasn't done before. I don't know why. That's a different story. But if you are saying that, Madam Prime Minister, that is a positive step to start the institutional building, because everything starts with leadership and then people. And then you go into your systems, your standard operating procedures, etc. So, but you must start there, because if you don't have the leadership that has that vision or that sense of purpose of where we have to go, how we're going to translate it, operationalize it, measure it, and hold people accountable. If you don't have that, you're not going to get strong institutional building. And that is sorely lacking in a lot of them. I mean, I sit here and, I mean, it is paining me to see the pressures that we face, like with our manufactured cables, where people are importing substandard wires. We manufacture to international standards. You have people from England coming to test our cables and certify them. And you have people unscrupulously bringing in substandard wires, and we have to be the watchdog. We have to protect our own business. We have to go into the bureau and beg them to investigate things and follow it up before we get some action. And then in the process, we lose millions of dollars in revenue, while they do all sorts of other things too, which I don't want to talk about. So the institution strengthened. You can clearly see how it is going to contribute to competitiveness. And why is that government, this government, the last government, why would they want to do something about that? For Christ's sake, if you are a true Chinese like me, you would want to. And I hope that this government, they don't just talk, they actually do something about it. And it's not hard to fix. Yes, it takes discipline, it takes a lot of effort, but it's possible. The moment people get this, you know, I'll tell you something interesting. Just a thought. This morning, my wife called me and she said, Dave, somebody in a very important ministry called me. And he said that, I can't handle this thing here, I feel I want to leave. And she said, why? She said, this government is moving different. I said, are they moving right? Are they starting to do the right thing and they were getting uncomfortable? So some people get uncomfortable when you start to do the right thing. But don't stop doing the right thing, Madam Prime Minister, and we'll get the institutions working. Minister, sorry. Maybe I'm seeing your future.
Vision 2030. So, again, I think that's a very passionate thing to be private, that give us the right institutions and we will look forward when it comes to these things. But Dawn, just your take on the institutions.
On the institution, sure. You know, on this issue, I want to join with Dr. Christo and some of the comments he made when he spoke about the areas that we are scoring in the centuries. And certainly this is one of those pillars where we are placed in the centuries, meaning that we are over 100 in terms of where we are, out of the 140 countries that have been surveyed. So for example, if I could just call some examples, this is out of 140. Favoritism in decisions of government officials, our score there is 137. Diversion of public funds, a score of 124. Public trust in politicians, 128. business costs of crime and violence, 136, ethical behaviors of firms, 125. Now, this, of course, is an annual survey, and we are hopeful that we are putting some of these scores behind us because we are forging a new direction as a country. I think I could be as bold to say that certainly there is a wave of optimism now in the country and a level of engagement where people want to contribute to a different society. So with regards to these pillars, I think we will see a natural improvement. But in addition, you know, I sort of thought to myself, what could be an area that can act as a lever, so to speak? Yes, we want to tackle all of these things, but we couldn't possibly do everything together. And I went back in my mind to rule of law and application of rule of law, enforcement of our legislative framework. As a country, we have excellent laws in our books. They really are not implemented. And I could go from something as simple as the minister said, dropping a piece of paper outside the garbage bin. You could be right next to it. We know we do those things. We continue to do those things because there really are no consequences. We look at somebody do that. We may not even comment. In fact, that may even just act as license for us to drop our own paper next to another bin. Things like traffic, things, you know, whether they're small or large things, I know we can do better. And I think by enforcement of law and holding, again, you know, a lot of these things come back to, are we prepared to hold ourselves accountable? Or are we going to try and talk the policeman out of giving us that ticket? Although we know that we have infringed the law, we know perhaps that we have been on the shoulder of, you know, driving along the shoulder. So to me, I would like to see that implementation of the legislative framework evenly without fear or favor. I was very heartened to hear you say, Ian, that you took a ticket and went to the passport office. Because, you know, we may look at corruption as something that other people do, you know, they may be walking around with some money in a bag. But the truth is, when we go and we make a little ziggy to somebody and we ask them for a favor to jump the line, all of those things are eroding the institution. And as we subject ourselves to the institution, I think we ourselves will be more engaged, more willing to make suggestions, more willing to perhaps whisper in the ear of someone who can do something that, listen, this is something we need to fix. So institutions, for me, I would say, it's really all of us in it together, but I would like to see it under the ambit of some sort of legislative framework, fair and even application of the law wherever you are. There is value for very senior and very influential people in the society demonstrating that I do not consider myself above the law. I have broken the law. I will pay my ticket. I will demonstrate. Those things send very strong signals to the society.
I didn't want to spend a little time with information. I don't use the value of questions from the floor. I think Peter did ask a question, Mrs. Peter Gales. We spent some time on that, which is about the code method. So I won't go over that. But I do have a question here that I think is going to be quite useful for us to hear. Doctor, and I don't have a name on the person, so if you recognize, you should ask further on and let me know. Someone wrote, as Dr. Kisto stated, government should be a leader. As the main employer in TNT, can they truly be a fair and unbiased enabler to business and innovation? Now that may be more for the minister and others, but I would just want to offer, I think there are many institutions that the government has put forward, as well as the private sector, to enable business innovation. The concept of building research and development into our institutions and into the public service, I think that's one area that I've never seen in the public service, somebody looking at things called process improvement. And this is done at one time. Can I take something that takes 10 steps and do it in 8 steps without causing a problem for my controls and my environment? So I will have it audited before I implement it. And those type of behaviors. So I think certainly the government has an opportunity to do that. But as a main employer, public service is one of our largest areas of employ. Can they be fair and unbiased enabler to business and innovation in the future? So I don't know if
I would say that I see this as one of those areas where there's really scope for partnership between the government and private sector. And the reason I say that is in the private sector, I think certainly the private sector is less constrained than a government institution would be, because a government is trying to serve the population of this whole country, whereas in the public sector, in the private sector, I mean, we're a little bit more focused, we have more control over resources, we can react more quickly. And some of the lessons that we have learned in the private sector, I think those lessons can certainly be translated in the public sector. And I think that is one of the avenues for some sharing and so on. Of course, if I wanted to take a much broader perspective, I would say, yes, the government has that responsibility, and not necessarily through the end result where you actually interface with that service. But again, if I go back to some of the pillars of what we are measuring, you know, we are looking at things like, for example, higher education and training, and investing in those areas, I think, could be some of where the government would put some attention and some resources too, so that the output of that could be a different level of service and interaction for the public.
We'll go to another question. A more broad perspective as far as Latin America. Someone noted that Chile is ranked among the highest in Latin American countries. I think Dr. Pistori pointed that out, due to the fact that they have a public institution called the Ministry of Innovation, focus on innovation within the country and within the public service. I mean, certainly I was not aware of that, and assuming that is correct, I think it would be very nice to the other question. How do you look at innovation throughout? And I think David and Dawn, just before we went, we were speaking about this, and it's so coincidental because the minister just spoke about innovation in calypso, innovation in music, innovation in culture. Innovation is not just mean an iPad or, I'm quoting Dave now, or a smartphone. So creating a ministry of innovation to bring that focus. Someone did know that Chile does that, and I thought that would be good to mention what Dawn said. Now, someone brought it closer to home and spoke about the CSO. And again, the minister did raise this. And looking at the fact that a lot of the information is here, so I think Dr. Pistori also pointed out that much of the information, which may have impacted us in the rankings because it's very dated information. And because of that, it's not backed up to institutions that are not performing. How reliable is the ranking given the CSO? So clearly, it would have impacted our ability to gather our data and to categorize and report properly and read that information. So I think that kind of goes without saying.
I wonder if I could just add a rejoinder on that. And again, I must say I was quite happy to hear the minister identifying and saying that with respect to CSO, this is going to be an area of focus because, of course, we need accurate and timely data with which to do planning and for how we allocate our resources. The issue of the CSO has been coming up in many of the external reports that we receive about the country. Certainly in terms of the Moody's downgrade of Trinidad and Tobago, they actually pointed to the fact that we don't have reliable data. If you're making decisions and policy with unreliable, dated data, of course, you can have confidence in the decision you're making. Maybe the decision you're making it's just focusing on the wrong thing. Perhaps it was a decision that should have been made a long time ago because the data is so old. I think also in the IMF report that was done last year, there was also a strong focus on the fact that there is no reliable data for planning and for the direction of the economy for the country. So again, when I looked through the statistics here and thought of ways of what are the things that we can do now, where can we have those levers that could make a big difference, I saw the CSO as one of those levers, and I was very happy to hear you say, Minister, that we are going to have some focus on that. I know there's a new building set out and so on for them, and we can only benefit from having that data timely, reliable, and accurate.
Yeah, and it's you must understand that. I mean, in rolling out a strategy, the wise use of information and data becomes critical. So I find it so strange, really strange, that a country like Trinidad and Tobago will not pay serious attention to something like information and data. And one thing I like to say about information and data is, you know, we should be so well connected that how well we access that information and data should be almost at your fingertips, like how it is away. And that also will help to develop our competitiveness, it help business leaders to make decisions, leaders in the country to make decisions too, and to guide them. So we shouldn't treat that slightly, and our planning minister has indicated that they are working on that in that area. So it's good to see that they recognize the importance of information and data and its relevance to country strategy and business strategy.
Well, you need information
Yes.
to the full strategy. Well, I have two questions that are very similar. One from the exchange telephone from the Honorable Chairman, Caribbean Chamber, and another one which is unsigned. But I'll read them both, and you can see the panelists will hear the similarity. Problematic factors will come as no surprise from the report, and what actions are required to tackle them by whom and on what time scale. So this is the question that puts a time frame to this, because we always know that a government with a 5-year mandate for planning and diversification takes 10, 20, 30 years or something. It's about Vision 2050. The other question, plenty things need to fix regarding the report. Plenty things. This is my favorite question, by the way. So, I don't know who you are, but you have to see the handwriting to understand this plenty things was done with emphasis. What are the top 3 things we should fix first? And what criteria should we use to fix? Now, should I see both of these questions? Basically say we need priority and we need a time scale. Because boiling in the ocean will get you. So panelists, I mean, I know that we are at a little bit over our time. So let me make this the last question.
This is the last question.
Unless I get the signal that we can continue. And open it up to you. What are the things from the report that we need to fix first? And what time scale? We have the minister here, let's make use of it. Let's give her some time frames that we would like to see issues addressed. I think that would be
I want to link this question a bit to the social scale that Professor Carrillo has shown in his presentation. One of the top things I think we need to address is the issue of people feeling secure in the country. I think that without, I mean, you can have $1 million, you can have what you want. If you don't have that sense of security, if you are plagued by what is called in the report crime and theft, it is going to mess with your mind. And as a society, I know we feel vulnerable. I know we've become, being careful has become the new normal. And even so, we still feel vulnerable. We have all the burglar bars, we are doing everything and so on. So I would say the level of First of all, maybe physical violent crime. I think that is something that we need to tackle with urgency. On this area, perhaps my thoughts are aligned with the Honorable Prime Minister, who that was one of his first appointments. He got his government in place, put himself and the Attorney General in place, and on day one, he brought in place the Minister of National Security, because I do think that is one of our highest priorities. Beyond that, if I had to get down into some of these things are really intertwined. I would say work ethic, government bureaucracy, those are two areas that came out quite high as being problems, factors for doing business in Trinidad and Tobago. Those are the ones that the report has, but I would hesitate to leave the private sector here, going away thinking that things in the private sector are all hunky-dory. I work in the private sector and I know the areas for improvement. That linkage to me would be the linkage on our per capita income, where people are enjoying very good wage, good standard of living, and we would, if we are honest, we know we are not giving that level of productivity for it. I think that is a national issue that we need to think about and to tackle. The other one, I'm going to save my third one for something that's not immediate. And again, because some of those questions brought in the time scale into it, I want to make a plea for diversification of the economy, because at the end of the day, what we are looking for is sustainable development. This is not something that we are going to have in the next 2 to 3 years, but certainly we need to embark on that. I think we can no longer be a one-pony circus on that, leaning on the oil and energy sector so strongly. I would like to see, again, the growth and improvement in the manufacturing sector. That is an important sector of the country for employment. They employ far more many people than the energy and the oil sector. So that is a sector we need to put some focus on. But also in the long term, I want to make that plea for diversification. Let us find a next means of earning foreign currency for this country, and all of the other things that would go with it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, sure. Let me start by again quoting our present Prime Minister. He said, "I take my oath seriously." He said, "I take my oath seriously." And as a business leader, I want you to know there are lots of things in business that I take seriously. And when I take it seriously, there's commitment and passion and trying to do things that I take seriously. And if he's going to take it the same way the way I'm taking it, one of the things I would like to see him tackle because of that oath is corruption. What has happened in our country is we have developed our competence in corruption. That's what I'm saying here. We have institutionalized corruption, and it's so prevalent that I don't think people feel it's a problem. You know, like they just do it. They say, well, you know, it's like I remember about 2 years ago, my daughter telling me, she said, you know, most of her friends, they father buy the license for them. I said, well, why not to buy your license for you? And it's really, really endemic. It has suffused the entire fabric of our society. And it's so bad that I am literally a loner in the society. I have few friends. I stay by myself, to be quite honest, because I'm afraid of a lot of people. So I would like to see him clean out the audience table, so to speak. I would feel really good. It would be like like a breath of fresh air for me as a Trini to see that happen. I really can't handle it anymore. I'm sick and tired, and I told him that. So if you want some advice on how to do it, I would gladly give him some. But I know there are lots of people in here who know exactly what to do, what are the initiatives you have to take, how to translate them, roll them out, and measure them too. And if you're serious about them, make sure you hold people accountable who are engaged in that process. The second thing I would like to say is that I was very, very impressed when I heard this thing. It's news to me. I always I mean, I always look at Chile as a as a as a different country in South America, and having a minister of innovation. I think it was Kaplan and Norton who said that you innovate or perish. That's how important it is. And I think Drucker also said that too. If you are not innovating, you die. One guy said that it's really two things. It's really about a sense of urgency, creating a sense of urgency in your country, in your business, and innovating. And innovation, we should look at innovation from all areas. Like whatever, like this is a tripartite kind of arrangement between government, the institution of higher learning, and business. We are not engaging the institution of higher learning to focus on serious training and development. They are the people who have a lot of knowledge and expertise. People like us, I mean, we are not academics. We can't find a cure for cancer or take ginseng root that the South Koreans did and turn it into $1 billion business. They need to do that with cassava or something like that, and then bring it to us and say, look, this is the potential of this product. Pay us X amount of $1 million for the research and development work, and to commercialize it and turn it into a business. And if these institutions can't get funded, I think if our present Prime Minister could eradicate or even eliminate 80% of the corruption, he could take some of the money saved there and donate it to the university, right, for research and development work. Okay, so it will be like free money really, because I don't know what percentage of the dollar we really utilize, if it's 50, 60, but I'm sure it's maybe 60 or 70 for the most. And the last thing is, I will say, is diversification. We need to stop looking at oil and gas as our lifeline. We have become too dependent on it, and even every day I will be on Bloomberg looking at the price of natural gas and the price of oil, and everybody's, oh, we're in trouble. The economy dropped by 2%. Why? Because of why it has to be that way, and we need to inspire and encourage the process of diversification. Look, and don't start big. Don't feel you have to invent an iPhone. Somebody could be making something like pepper sauce, and they could turn it into a Tabasco story. It could be a little thing. All you need is the human imagination at work, and a government and the institution of higher learning coming in and giving them the support. And the entrepreneur, leave him alone. You'll be amazed to know what he could do. So I think these three things are really big issues for us. And they all involve leadership with the political will and the professional will to get these things done. That's my take on it.
So if I was to summarize it, today I would say leadership has come out, productivity has come out, corruption and the end of corruption has come out, focus on our institutions to enable, and of course, leading from the
Diversification.
So let me thank the panelists this morning. I think we had a great discussion. Thank all of you with your questions. I know we didn't get to every single one, but I hope that this was good.
Thank you very much, Ian. If I can ask the panelists to take your seats once again. And as you take your seats, I'd like to remind you of some important events that are coming up. Our next critical release will be the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor Report, which will take place in November 2015. And of course, in February 2016, we will once again invite our private sector captains to complete the Executive Opinion Survey, which would of course feed into our results into 2016. As we head into our vote of thanks, Honorable Minister Camille Robinson-Regis, thank you for accepting our invitation this morning to share your insights on the report, which has provided much needed direction for both the public and private sector. I'd like to invite Notoya Batiste on stage to present a token to the Honorable Minister. Thank you very much. We certainly look forward to you joining us as we host events similar to this one to inform both the public and private sectors on the analysis and recommendations of policy. Our business school also extends appreciation to all members of the panel for sharing your views. As leaders in the public and private sector, you have shown how important it is for both to be working in concert to make any meaningful progress in our country's competitiveness. We also thank the chambers and associations, TNT Chamber of Commerce, TTME, TTCSI, and the Energy Chamber for their collaboration with us to ensure that the right C-suite individuals complete the Executive Opinion Survey. We also thank those of you in the audience who have completed the survey and continue to take part in the survey. We also wish to thank our sponsors, iGovTT and PowerGen. We value your partnership, and we hope that you continue to bring to the nation purposeful, insightful analysis and points of view to shape our country's prowess. Finally, we also say thanks to our live stream viewers via Suriname, Guyana, Guatemala, Ghana, our audience here today, faculty, students, alumni, and definitely the media as well. Thank you very much for your attendance and support. And as you depart for this morning, I would just like to ask the Honorable Minister, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, our panelists, and our sponsors to please remain so that we may take photos before you depart. Thank you everyone for joining us here this morning. We wish you a safe journey back to your office and to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.